Hello there everybody, Data Pioneer here with the Linux Unix Tech Channel, and again today I'm out on my Farron OS Linux desktop, and I thought today I would talk about a topic that I wanted to get into for a while that people have asked for, and that is, let's discuss Linux file permissions in the command line, and how do we go about working with those. And so we'll take a look at that right after this. Okay, I'm out in my terminal now, and I thought we'd take a look at the file permissions in the terminal. And so let's go ahead and let's run a PWD to see where we are here. So my print working directory is I'm in Home Data Pioneer, and so that's where I'm currently located in the file system. And I'm going to do a who am I to see who I am. I am Data Pioneer. All right, and so let's clear the screen. And let's run a listing to see what we have. And so this is a current listing. The ls is the list storage command in Linux, and that lists a storage that we have, and this is the file system structure from where we are in the current file system hierarchy, which is my home directory, Data Pioneer, Home Data Pioneer. And so I have a directory that I've created called Sandbox. I'm going to cd into that directory, and let's clear the screen and run a listing of that. And you can see that I have a directory called testdir, and I have two files, one called testfile1, one called testfile2. So let me, rather than just running an ls, let me do an lh, which is the option for long listing human readable. And if I run that, it gives me a better perspective of the files and directories themselves, and it also exposes something in the structure here that we need to look at, which is our topic for today, and that is the permissions associated with the directory and with the files themselves. First thing you need to notice is I've got this directory here, testdir. It is in blue. Now this is color coded in the terminal, and it's set up specifically for each distribution of Linux. Distributions of Linux do not have to expose the colors like this or display the colors like this, but normally if it does, blue indicates a directory and white indicates a regular file. Okay, so we have two regular files here and a directory. Now the permissions are out here on the left hand side, so let's look first of all at the very first column of this line when we do an ls tac lh here to list out these directories and files. The very first listing, which is testdir, which I told you was a directory I created, we have a D in the first position here, and that D indicates that it is a directory. All right. If you don't have the D but you have just the dash here, that means that this is just a regular file. And it's not a directory. Now there are other symbols besides D and dash that are available in Linux. We won't get into that today because that's beyond the scope of this particular video, but just recognize the fact that a D is a directory, and that if a D is missing, has a dash there, then it is a regular file. Okay, so the permissions here follow the directory or file designation in this listing that we have. And so there are 9 elements here that follow, and they are in groups of 3. And so we have these 3 here, and then we have these 3 here, and then we have the final 3 here. Now what are those? Alright, so the first 3, which is R, W, and X, represents the owner of this directory or file. All right. The next 3 represents the group owner assignment. So this is the owner of the file, and this is the group owner of the file or directory, in this case a directory. And then the last three indicate everybody else. This is the everybody else or the world. All right. So, who is the owner of this file? So if we go out here to the next column, we're going to ignore this column for now, and go out to the next column here beyond the permissions. This very first column here, designation, indicates the owner of this directory or file. And so here, Data Pioneer is the owner of testdir. Why is Data Pioneer, which is me, why is Data Pioneer the owner of testdir? Because I created it using the makedir command. All right, and so that means that Data Pioneer has these permissions, which is in the first position here of the set of three, the 1, 2, and 3 set. So Data Pioneer can read, write, and execute. That's what the R, W, and X stand for. So R is for read, W is for write, and X is for execute. Now, reading and writing and executing a directory is a little bit different than reading and writing and executing a file. We'll talk about that in a moment. But just understand that Data Pioneer is the owner of that directory, and Data Pioneer is the owner of test file 1 and test file 2. And then also the Data Pioneer group, which is the group that Data Pioneer belongs to, which is a group that's created automatically when Data Pioneer's account is created in Linux, also has read, write, and execute. All right, and then everybody else can only read and execute the directory. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, first of all, before we get into that, let's look down at the file. And so the file that I created, Data Pioneer has the ability to read and write to that file, but does not have the ability to execute the file. What does that mean? That means that you cannot run this file as a program or as a script. All right, it doesn't have the ability to run the file as a script. It isn't a script, so it doesn't matter at this point. In the second group of permissions here, read, write, and execute, we have no execute bit turned on, so we can only read and write. And so that means that Data Pioneer, the group, members of that group, can read and write this file, but they can't execute the file. And then everybody else has the ability to read the file, and they can see it, and they can read the contents of the file, but they can't write to the file, nor can they execute the file as well. Similarly, up here as a directory, the difference here between what read, write, and execute pertaining to a directory means as opposed to pertaining to a file, when Data Pioneer, as the owner of the test directory here, testdir, when he can read, write, and execute, that means that he can look at the file, he can read the file, he can see it listed in the file structure as we can do it here. He can write to the file, which means he can put files in there. He can write to it, create files within the testdir directory. And then execute means that he can descend into the directory. He can change directory into testdir. So if I do a cd testdir, you can see that I have the ability to, I don't have any files in there, but I do have a subdirectory called subdir. And so I created that subdir by running the makedir command to create that. And so I have the ability to write to that. I have the ability to cd to that directory, and I can also cd to subdir as well. Okay, so I have the ability to do that. And why do I have the ability to do that? That's because I have this executable here in the first group of 3, which belongs to the owner of that directory, which is me, Data Pioneer. And so if I didn't have the X, I couldn't descend into testdir. All right. So let's take a look at this file, test file 1. I have the ability to read the file. I have the ability to write that file, but I don't have the ability to execute the file. Now, test file 1 is not an executable, but I can make it an executable if I so desire. Alright, so if I come back up to test file 1 and make that executable so I can demonstrate what making that executable will do to the file and how it will change the permissions for that file for us for me specifically, since I am the owner of test file 1. What I can do is I can go up the directory tree, doing a cd ... back up to sandbox. Let's do a listing again, and so we have do a listing out, and so we have test file 1 not executable at this point. So if I run nano, which is a text editor, against test file 1, all right, and open it up, I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some script in here. I'm going to do ls lh, okay, which is not the way you create a script. But for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to do it this way. There is a proper way of creating a script, and this isn't it, but I'm just going to do it so just to show you what executing a script looks like. So if I do a Control X and say yes and hit enter, it's going to save that. And so let's go back out, and now let's do let's clear the screen, and let's do a listing again of the file structure. And so we have tester, we have now some content in test file 1, the file, which is what I just put in there. And to make that executable, what I'm going to do is, here we have R, W, and nothing here for Data Pioneer. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a command called the change mod command, and do a +X, which gives an executable bit across both the owner, group owner, and everybody else. All right. You may not want to do it this way, but I'm going to do it this way just for demonstration purposes, adding the executable bit to all 3 groups. And then the file that we want to apply the executable bit to, which is test file 1. All right. And then now if I rerun a listing here, you can see that test file 1 is now green. Now green, if your particular distro in the terminal presents it this way, indicates that this is an executable file. All right, so that's what the green stands for. But you don't need to know that colored combination or designation. All you need to know is that if you look in the group permissions here and owner permissions and other permissions, for the owner RWX, that X is showing up now. It's also showing up in the group itself for Data Pioneer, the Data Pioneer group, and it's also showing up for everybody else. And so everybody else can execute this file as well. And so to execute the file, what I'm going to do is come down here, put a dot, which means that I'm in the current directory of Sandbox. I'm executing the file called test file 1, and what it does is it runs ls-lh, which runs a long listing of the contents of that script, okay, which is test file 1. So now test file 1 is a script, and I'm able to execute it because I have the executable bit right there as Data Pioneer. And if I was a member of the group of Data Pioneer, I would be able to do the same thing, and if everybody else, I'll be able to do the same as well. All right, and so that makes that file executable, and we're able to run it as an executable as opposed to just a regular file. So let me go ahead and remove that now. And so if I take and run chmod, and I do a -x against the file test file 1, that removes the executable bit. And so if I now do another listing out of that particular structure here, we have that for Sandbox, we can see that now the test file has been returned to a regular file. It no longer has the executable bit. Now let's say that I wanted to make this particular file, since it does have that content in there. If you can see, we can cat the file, and you can see that we do have ls-lh, so when we run that file as an executable, it will list out the storage in long human readable format. And so if I wanted to make that only executable for me as the owner, but not for the group or everybody else, then what I can do, let me run that out again, and what I can do is I can only add the executable bit here for that particular owner, Data Pioneer. All right, and so if I want to add the executable bit on this particular file, which has that content in there, just to me, for Data Pioneer as the user of that file, or user owner, what I can do is I can run the chmod or change mod command, and I can take and say I want to add the executable bit only to the user, so u plus x against test file 1. All right, and so now that I've done that, if I take a look at the listing again, you can see that it is green, which means that it is executable once again. So an executable bit has been added somewhere, and where that has been added is only to the first group, which is the user, which is the u plus x. So the user has now the executable bit attached to the file, and so as the user, Data Pioneer, if I run the listing, or I run executable against test file 1 again, make that executable and run that file as an executable, it's going to list out the contents of the directory that I'm in, which is Sandbox. Now, of course, you lose all the color here. That's okay, but it did execute, and so we were able to do that. And if I go ahead and remove that again, so if I do a chmod u minus x against test file 1 and then list it out, you can see that it no longer is green, the file, test file 1, because the executable bit has been removed here, okay? And so I will not be able to execute that. So if I try to execute the file, you can see that it says permission denied, so it did not execute it. All right, and so let's clear the screen again. Let's do a listing once more and show you that if I want to add the executable bit here for the group and not the user or owner of the file, I could do that as well. And the way to do that would be to run chmod, and instead of user, I say group plus x of test file 1. Okay, and if I run a listing again, it is green again, which means we do have the executable bit turned on somewhere, and that somewhere now is the group Data Pioneer as opposed to the owner. You really wouldn't want to do this. Why would you want to give the group owners more permissions than you do yourself as the user owner of the file? But I just wanted to demonstrate that. And so let me go ahead and remove that. That'd be g minus x test file 1. All right. Now if we run a listing one more time, you can see that now I just returned to a regular file. Okay, so let's say that you wanted to for test file 1, it's concentrating here on test file 1. Let's say that you wanted to remove the ability to write to that file as opposed to executing the file, even though it does have content. All right, so let's do this. To do that, I would do a change mod, and then for the user, I would remove the ability to write, so u minus w for test file 1. All right, and so now if we run a listing again on that file, you can see that we cannot, as the user owner, Data Pioneer, in the first group of permissions, I should not be able to write to that file anymore, even though the group assigned to that, which is Data Pioneer, the group owner, would have the ability to write to it. And so let's demonstrate that. So as the user, I am a Data Pioneer as the owner of that file, owner user. And so if I were to echo, and let's echo, can I write to this file? And let me append that so I don't remove the what I have there. So I want to, instead of just having, if I just use the 1 redirection symbol, it's going to overwrite the file. So if I do 2, that's going to append to the bottom of the file itself, if I can write to it, that is. And so I should not be able to. And I'm going to redirect that out as an appended redirection to test file 1. And it says test file 1 permission denied. And that's because I don't have the ability to write to the file here. All right. If I add that back, so I'm going to do a chmod u plus w. If I can type test file 1. All right. So now if I do a listing again, I can see that I have the write capability has been returned as permission for that particular user owner data pioneer for that particular file, test file 1. All right. And so now if I clear the screen here, and if I run a listing one more time to give a listing out here, and if I now rerun the echo, can I write to this file and append that to test file 1. All right, it looks like it wrote to the file that time because I didn't get any errors back. And so let's take a look at that. Let's cat the file. Well, first of all, let's list the file, long listing. You can see that it is larger, so it looks like it did write to the file fine. And so I can do a cat against test file 1. And sure enough, appended to the end of the original line that I had there in that file, I have can I write to this file. So it did write to the file. All right, so I was able to write to it because I was able to put back the write capability on the permissions for that file as the user owner of that file. All right, so let's take a look at something else here. Let's clear the screen. So let's go ahead and run a listing again of the sandbox directory. And so we have the testdir directory and we have test file 1 and 2. And so right now, let's take a look at what it means to have write capability of a directory as opposed to write capability on the file that's be removed. All right, so right now I can write to that particular directory, and so if I do a cd into testdir, all right, since I have write capability as data pioneer, owner, user of that directory, I should be able to create a file in there and should be able to write to that directory. And so let me do a touch of test file 3 while I'm in testdir. And so if I run a listing, I can see now that I have test file 3, which I created just now, and it is empty. All right, but I was able to write to that particular testdir directory because I have the write capability right there. All right, and so if I go ahead now and let's run a listing one more time. All right, so we can see that we have that there. So if I come back out of testdir and run a listing one more time, and if I remove the write capability permissions, if you will, from testdir for the user, owner, test data pioneer, I can do that by running chmod, and I can do u-w, all right, for testdir. All right, and so now if I run, let me clear the screen. If I run a listing, you can see that I no longer have the ability to write. I remove that write permissions on testdir. And so now if I descend back into testdir, I should no longer be able to create. Let me run a listing here. I have test file 3, but let me see if I can write there by writing test file 4 into it. So if I do a touch test file 4, it says permission denied. Okay, it's permission denied because I no longer have the ability to write to testdir, okay, because I removed that write capability permissions. Okay, so if I cd back up to Sandbox and run the listing one more time, and if I replace the write permissions here for Data Pioneer by adding the write permission bit to that particular group of permission stream by using chmod and then u plus w. for testdir. Okay, and if I list it out again, you can see that now the write permissions has been returned to testdir. And if I go ahead and repeat the process here that I tried to earlier and failed, which is to touch a file in Sandbox. So let me descend first into testdir. Okay, and then let's see if I can create that file. So I'm going to touch a file and call it test file 4. You can see that I was able to successfully write that file out now that the write permissions has been returned to the file. So let me go ahead and clear the screen. Okay, so let's recap what we've done here. So let's do an ls/lh here and list those out again. I'm in subdir now instead of testdir, but I can still show you what we did. All right, so what we did was we took a look at directories and files, regular files. We have the D in the first position here and the long listing, human readable, on this directory, which indicates that this is a directory. And then if your distro supports it, you will get blue color here for a directory, which indicates visually that you have a directory, not a file. And then down below that, we have 2 files, which, of course, everything in Linux is a file, so that's even a file. Subdir is a file as well. But we have test file 3 and test file 4. Both of those are files, and we know that because in the first position here, these are positioned with a dash instead of a D. All right, so these are not directories, these are regular files. And then following that, we have 9 symbols that follow that in the second column, and they're in sets of 3. So the first set belongs to the user owner, which is Data Pioneer. The second set here of 3 belongs to the group assigned to Data Pioneer. Okay, if this were something else like root or some other type of group, then that would belong to that group instead of Data Pioneer, but it happens to be the same. Doesn't have to be. And then the last group of 3 here is the world or others. And so the first group is user owner, second group is group owner, and the third group of permissions is other or world. And so in the particular case of test file 3, we can see that the group owner, the user owner rather, Data Pioneer here, has read, write, and permissions, but no executable permissions on the file. We can see that the group owner, Data Pioneer, in the second position, has read, write permissions to that particular file, test file 3, but does not have executable either. And then finally, in the third group, everybody else, or the world, they have read permissions on the file, which means they can read the file, but they cannot write to the file and they cannot execute the file, even if it is executable. All right, so they or as an executable script, and so they don't have the permissions to run that. And so that's what it looks like for the file. Now, for the subdirectory or any directory in Linux that is a typical directory, which is read, write, execute, read, write, execute, read, and execute here for the directory. The first 3 permissions here, the permission stream in the first group, is read, write, and execute. So Data Pioneer, which is the user owner of that directory, can read the directory, can read the contents, can write to that directory, can add to that directory itself, okay, and then has executable permissions for that directory, which means they can descend into or cd into that directory as well. Data Pioneer, the group, has the same here for read, write, execute, as does the user and owner. But the world or other here is read and execute only, which means that everybody else can read the directory, can read the contents and view the contents of the directory, but they can't write to that directory at all. They have no write permissions, can't put any files into that directory, remove any files. And then finally they can descend into, they can cd into that directory as well. All right, so this has been a quick video on permissions in Linux for directories and files in Linux. I'll be doing a subsequent video. I'll get into more detail. We'll look closer at numerical assignments of permissions as well in Linux. Right now we looked at symbolic only, but we'll look at numerical permission capability in Linux as well, and how do you go about reading those, how do you go about creating that, how do you change directories, or change permissions rather, on a file using numerical as opposed to symbolic notation. We'll take a look at that later. So if you thought this video was helpful, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up for this video. And so this has been Data Pioneer. Hope you enjoyed the video, and take care, and we'll look at you later. Take care. Bye-bye.